Well, thank you to Dr. Anwar and your marketing mavens. I don't know if you're aware, but you picked perfect timing. This is World Investor Week. October 1 to October 7th is World Investor Week. And there are on six continents, there are efforts to inform people about investing. So it's well timed. You're 2 weeks behind the anniversary of Lehman Brothers, which was the 15th of September 2008. The largest single bankruptcy we've ever had in this country was when Lehman Brothers went down. And the sad part is about a week later we bailed out AIG. In hindsight, I think a lot of the shock of the 2008 crisis, had we bailed out Lehman Brothers, it was only about another $82 billion. Had we done that, I think the shock factor would have been a lot less. But that was one that just went worldwide. People said, how can an investment house over 100 years old, and they, for those who are unaware, they had sold preferred stock in February of that year, of 2008. If you bought it by September the 15th, it was worthless. Less than a year. And again, highly rated stock. It was preferred stock, had a high dividend, came out with a lot of hype. Within about 8 months, you had nothing. Anybody who bought it for their portfolio was wiped out. So you picked a good time. One of the interesting phenomena that you need to be aware of relative to what we call the Great Recession, not depression, but recession, is that as of this point, the top 10% of wealth holders in the United States own 84% of the stocks. The top 20% of the wealth holders own 93% of the stocks. Right? That means the other 80% of the citizens in this country own 7% of the stock, whether it be in a mutual fund, a 401k, an IRA, whatever. And what happened during the crisis is when the market fell apart, and I'll put some numbers up in a little bit and show you. When the market dropped, it frightened people so much that a lot of these small investors, and even though they were investing in mutual funds, never came back. The difficulty is they missed out on the last 10 years. It just isn't there. And let me show you very briefly, if I can get the right one to come up. Okay, this is looking at since 2008. Now, I went back to 2007 in order to draw percentages. What happens is, in 2008, and most of this was triggered by the housing crisis. Now, the interesting thing is, in 2006, there were hints that the housing market was beginning to unravel. And a lot of realtors looked and said, that's a good thing. It will draw people back into the market. Because the prices in 2006 quit accelerating and beginning to taper, leaving aside a couple of the bizarre areas like Las Vegas, etc. But what happened is, a side note, always running down a rabbit hole, one of my colleagues here at the university who has since retired owned a lot in Pahrump, Nevada, just outside Las Vegas. At the boom of it, he was dumb lucky enough, it was not smart, believe me, I know him pretty well. He sold the lot and got enough money for the lot that when Las Vegas real estate market cratered, he bought a house in the same neighborhood already built and paid for it. Gives you an idea of what happened in Las Vegas. The bottom just came out. It's happening again out there. It's rising like crazy. Right? Again, it just happens to be one of those areas. But on balance, in 2006, we saw it begin to slow down. 2007, there were more hints, but nobody wanted to believe them. By 2008, it became obvious because the losses were real. This is what happened in the stock market, and I use the S&P 500, and I picked July 1 of each year just to play fair. So it's not January or December, it just happens to be mid-year. Those are the rates of return. Compound return, 12.4%. Right? If you were in the market. The problem is, remember, Only the top 20% of the US population is in the market. They're the only ones who gain. If you panicked in 2009, when the S&P 500 went to 935, and you dumped your stock, and you immediately put it into either a CD or a T-bill, by the way, with apologies to Pat, the CD rate is Amarillo National Bank. I pulled it off this morning. That's their 1-year rate. But that's what you earned in a certificate of deposit. That's what you earned in a T-bill. And that's what you missed out on by not being in the market. So when you hear people talk about the rich get richer, this is what happened. Is that if you stayed in the market after 2008, after 2009 when it bottomed, look at the returns you got. And the problem, what it has done is it has completely changed up the way we look at risk and return. In the sense that you've got a very small group of people who were willing and able to take that equity risk. Thus, we have right now in the US the greatest wealth inequality we've ever seen. It is absolutely enormous. And in a moment or two, I'll talk a little bit why I think that might be a problem going forward. This kind of shows you what the debts look like between 2008 and 2018. The mortgages are basically about where they were. Haven't really changed much. House prices haven't changed either, just by the by. I moved from Canyon to Amarillo about 15 years ago. We paid about $85 to $90 a square foot. Right now in Amarillo, it's $100. Nothing has happened in that decade. Right? So again, for a lot of people, if you're not in the stock market, their wealth was in their house. It hasn't moved for the last 10 years. It's just stuck there. So the mortgages are pretty constant. Auto loans, they went up. Actually, they came down through about 2012. Since then, they've gone up. Now, we are seeing in 2018, the report just came out yesterday, there is a decline in auto sales. But again, I think it's because we've kind of met the demand. And we're a little uncertain of what's going to happen with this thing on all the imports from overseas. Credit cards have gone from 986 to 1 trillion. That's 2 people went shopping, and it's in the rounding, so that's not a big deal. One of them that you should know about, that you should be very familiar about, student loans have increased 144% in that decade. We've gone now from 627 to 1.5 trillion dollars. In my view, that is one of the great risks facing us going forward. Right now, close to 20% of them are delinquent. The interesting thing about the delinquent student loans is most of them are under $10,000, and they're held by people who came to college and then dropped out. Therefore, they weren't able to get the high-paying jobs. Therefore, they're not able to pay back their student loans. And by the way, you can never get away from a student loan until you die. You can't bankrupt yourself away from it. It's like the IRS. You're there until you're 6 under. They've got you. So next year, by the way, any of you borrowing, the rate goes up to 5%. All right, so it's at 4 right now, 4 and some change. It goes up to 5% next year. Personal loans basically actually came down. Right? One of the interesting things, it did not move. All right, so basically what you're seeing is a world that hasn't changed very much in almost a decade. What that means is we have lost out on all of what could have been potential growth during that 10 years. So when you hear people, and we'll talk about it, the longest bull market in history, right, has drug us back to where we were when the bottom started. That's all we've done. Now, I'm delighted we got ourselves back to it, but we are at this point no further ahead than we were in about 2007. We're pretty much back to that. The last one I kind of want to bring up and show you is median family income. Expand it up. That better not be mine. Probably is. Go away. If you know me, you know I'm in class. So you know, comment. This one is kind of interesting. This is national. Amarillo's median income isn't quite at this level yet. We'd like to get there, but we're not quite up to that level yet. And this is national. It's growing at 0.5% per year, which effectively tells you that wage earners, if you are looking to make your wealth through your salaries, no, it's not happening, folks. We have had a decade of effectively absolutely flat wages. Now, they're down for a few years, up for a couple of years. There's going to be variation year by year. But the point is that at that level, you cannot accumulate wealth. Now, again, what it brings up is the issue of going forward. Our birth rate right now is plummeting. We're not replacing ourselves. It takes 2.1 children per woman to keep ourselves level. We're at about 1.7, right? Which is marginally disturbing for people my age because I'm counting on all of you to pay my retirement. Right? Hopefully with great comfort. But the point is, if you look at the demographics, you've got a very large group of people at or near retirement being supported by a very small group of hardworking people. And we're not breeding enough to replace ourselves. Which means, and again, given our current feelings about immigration, that's how we've always solved that problem. Right? We've traditionally always had birth rates below what is considered to be replacement, at least since the modern industrial era. What has happened now is we're not bringing in the migrants we were bringing in to make up the difference, which effectively means you're going to have, if we don't change policies, again, a small group of people who are going to be taxed exceedingly high to pay for me. You know, and I hope you make your payments, because I'm looking forward to receiving mine. But the point is, that is just the mechanics, and there's no way out of it. And again, what it means is that group of people are going to find it with these flat incomes. How are you going to afford it? Right? And that is one of the major concerns. One of the issues about the student debt, 1 in 4 graduating students are now living with their families, their parents, in order to pay their student debt. The average coming out of WT right now, for those not aware, was $20,600. You need to make about $450 a month before tax to pay it off in the 10 years that you're supposed to pay it off at the current rate. So take your monthly income and knock out that $450 before tax. Because remember, you got to pay tax on it, then you got to pay back your student loans. So one of the things that a lot of us are very concerned about is that rate of growth, because those people are not going to be buying the way we've traditionally expected them to. Down at Admiral National, you need this group of people to start creating families, buy houses, buy appliances, buy kids' toys, etc. The bank thrives off of that. The community thrives off of that. And we're going to put them out there and say, don't do that. Don't have children. Stay with mom and dad and get those debts paid off. But if you do that over a decade, that's going to be a very difficult period. Right? Because again, everybody's now late getting started and trying to catch up. You weren't making those, what I hope, would be those stock market investments in your IRA account, because you're paying off that debt. So that's one of the real challenges that we face going forward. The biggest single challenge, and then I'll let our other speaker have the floor, the biggest single challenge in my mind that scares me the most, cybersecurity. Nobody talks about it. But right now, if you could get the right hacker to shut down the electrical grid, you are talking about trillions of dollars worth of damage. Because you cannot do financial transactions, you can't function, the internet goes down. All somebody has to do is hack the computer system controlling the power grid, and I'm hoping we've got it protected. But cybersecurity, both for corporations and nationally, to me is the most frightening thing going forward. It has nothing to do with the 2008 to 18 crisis, but we need to get focused on these things because it really is critical. The last issue I would raise on those kinds of concerns, if you are not paying attention to China right now, you're living in a fantasy world. All of you love these modern green devices. All of you run around with your phones. What powers it? A lithium-ion battery. What goes into a lithium-ion battery? Lithium, graphite, and cobalt. 80% of the world's cobalt is in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Zambia. All of it, except for the final 15%, controlled by the Chinese. They own the mines. They own the refining facilities, the roads and railroads that get it to Dar es Salaam to get it over to China to make those batteries. If I was Elon Musk, that would be my biggest worry, is where am I going to get my batteries? Right? But you need, if you are interested in any kind of developments that will affect the United States economy, watch what is going on with China. That economy is going to be a major competitor. And major competitors sometimes don't get along well. Right? But the Belt and Road Initiative, there is a railroad right now from Beijing to London, 14 days nonstop. Runs every week, both ways. You have to do two what they call trucks, the wheels underneath it, you have to do two swaps. Right? One in Kazakhstan and one in Belarus, but they've got that figured out. They just have those big square cranes that pick up the box, move that one over and drop it down on the other car with the other railroad gauge. Russia has a slightly different railroad gauge than the rest of the world, and they go through a piece of Russia. They also are building Dr. Anwar's home country of Pakistan. They have a rail line, highways, and a port at Gwadar that goes straight to China. If you try to cut them off around Singapore through the Straits of Malacca, 30% of the world's import-exports flow through that strait. If you try to cut them off, they'll just take the thing over to Pakistan, unload it in Gwadar, run it up the railroad, and you're in China. They now own the oil, the oil ability to empty the tankers and move it in Sri Lanka, as well as the rest of the port. There is a pipeline being built from Sri Lanka straight into China. So you say, I'll cut you off your oil. They'll just unload it in Sri Lanka and pipe it in. What they're doing is thinking about all of the alternatives. Where could I lose resources or access? And they're filling those holes. So the sad part is, while we're all fascinated, and deservedly so, this Supreme Court nomination is not trivial. In the meantime, the Chinese are still building. And somehow that is just not being watched. I wish we had the same level of excitement on that. But with that, I will turn over the floor.